Hello and welcome to the July edition of the AviaDev Insight Africa Connectivity Update for 2025, the podcast offering a deep dive into the stories behind the route developments to, from and within the African continent. I'm your host, Jon Howell, CEO and founder of AviaDev Africa. We are a platform dedicated to supporting fleet and route development impacting that particular region. Now, Friday, the 18th of July was Nelson Mandela Day, somebody who believed deeply in the spirit of Pan-African unity. And so I've pondered how he would introduce our protagonists. And with a little bit of help, I've come up with the following. And once again, it is a surprise for Sean and Behramjee. There comes a time in the journey of a continent when we must look not to the borders that divide us, but to the skies that unite us. When we must rise above the constraints of history and geography and embrace the promise of connection, of trade, of tourism, of opportunity for every African. Today, on this edition of AviaDev Insight Africa, we are joined by a voice that has long echoed this very promise. An adopted son of Africa who has walked the tarmac, charted the skies, and spoken truth to power in the corridors of aviation. Sean Mendis is not just an aviation expert, he is a bridge builder. A man who believes in the potential of the African skies to carry not only planes, but dreams. With decades of experience across the continent's aviation industry, from management to policy, from commentary to strategy, he brings not only insight, but integrity. Let us now listen, learn, and look forward together, because as we open our airspace, we open our future. You like that one, Sean?
I think that I must practice my Nelson Mandela voice next.
It's very good. It's very good. I think, like I say, if we do a live show, we'll just do some impressions for 20 minutes or so.
That introduction.
All right, Behramjee, he's strapped in. You ready?
That introduction for Sean sounds like he's getting a knighthood in Africa.
I know, yeah.
Wait.
You wait for yours, Behramjee. I'm sure yours is even more fancy.
Absolutely. Here we go. In every age, there are those whose wisdom becomes a compass, not only for an industry, but for a continent. In our time, as Africa charts its own course through the skies, we are honoured to welcome one such voice to AviaDev Insight Africa. Behramjee Ghadially is not just a man of data and destinations. He is a strategist, a scholar, and a steward of aviation knowledge, whose work has illuminated the path forward for countless stakeholders, from airline executives to government planners. With a deep command of network planning and market trends and a commitment to sharing insight with clarity and conviction, Behramjee has become a trusted voice in African and global aviation. He does not simply report on connectivity, he helps us understand its impact, its potential, and the urgency of getting it right. Today we listen not to just a guest, but to a guide, because we know when we know more, we can fly further together. Not bad. I think that was quite good, Behramjee.
Very nice. Yes.
Very good.
Mine sounded more like a professor introduction.
All right, well, that would be
Well,
mine.
you are more professorial, Behramjee. You are quite professorial, I must say.
Absolutely.
Even down to the wardrobe with the nice pink shirt today.
Yeah, where's the polo shirt? I can't believe it. Thought we all...
So I'll tell you an interesting story about these shirts which I'm wearing.
Oh, please.
They're from Bangkok. Let me guess. They're from a tailor in Bangkok.
Yes, a Japanese tailor.
Is that it? Is that the story?
Dear.
What an anecdote.
No. It's a French brand called Bowling. So it's available at a Japanese store called Tokyo in Bangkok. But now it's available only at Robinson stores across Bangkok. So it's a very nice short sleeve, pure silk shirt. It's about for 40 euros. I have 6 different colors. It feels very nice in hot and humid climate.
Nice. All right.
Yeah.
Can we move on from the sartorial conversation into the aviation conversation? So let's go.
Yes,
right. Okay.
please.
We've got loads to get through. As always, before we start, I just want to state that, of course, the opinions of my guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of AviaDev. So with the disclaimer done, welcome to a bumper July 2025 AviaDev connectivity update. Sean is in a departure lounge, so we do have a hard stop on here, but we've got lots going on and lots to talk about. So I'm going to start with you, Sean, and start with one item that is having a large impact, a massive impact on the domestic South African market, which of course is the FlySafair pilot strike. It's been going on for a couple of weeks. We're here, and that is the caveat. We're talking on July the 31st. So things may change by the time that people listen to this. But what's your take on it? What do we know? And are we at an impasse? Can we see light at the end of the tunnel? Where are we up to, Sean?
Well, I am sitting here in the Midwest Premier Lounge at Johannesburg Airport, or Tambo, and looking out of the window, literally to my left, I see a number of Safair planes have been taxiing in and out during the last couple of hours that I've been here. So yes, there is a strike ongoing. We have seen that around 60% of Safair's pilots who are represented by the Solidarity Union they initially announced their intention to strike, followed by a lockout from the company, and then they're currently in a mediation process, which has been ongoing now for, 10 days. However, we have seen a reduced schedule from Safair, but for the most part, minimal disruptions beyond the revised schedule that Safair has put out there. And again, as I said, watching this morning, I've seen Safair crews, pilots, and flight attendants walking through the terminal, all the Safair flights from the international terminal. So far, that's been in Harare and that's been in Mauritius. Both of them have departed exactly on time. And as I said, I see the aircraft flying. Certainly, there has been an impact in terms of the reduced schedule, but I do think that for now, at least, the company has been able to at least maintain some semblance of a regular schedule. That said, I think that just the duration of the strike and the points which are being raised by the various pilot groups, I think this is something where obviously there is a wages element to it, but there's also a work rules element to it. And I think a big challenge for a lot of these pilots in terms of what they have said has been the rostering system which Safair has in place, which often does not allow them to get days off per request and effectively leads to what they call quality of life challenges. And I think there's probably going to have to be some give and take, both from the pilots in terms of their overall wage demand probably will have to come down a bit, and Safair in terms of the quality of life improvements and the work crew improvements. I think that is probably where a solution will be found, and I am optimistic that a solution will probably be found next week, which is after 2 weeks of this lockout. But I really don't want to speculate. I'm hopeful, but I think Safair's contingency plans can only drag on for so long. The existing management pilots who are not part of Solidarity Union, they're going to run out of duty hours in terms of what they can fly. They've been chartering in, even from South African Airways has been assisting Safair by operating ACMIs for Safair on, for example, Cape Town to Durban, where SA themselves don't compete, so they've agreed to actually operate one of their Airbuses on that route. But this can't go on indefinitely. So I think there's very much going to be inflection point sometime next week, and I'm hoping that is going to be for the better, given that the two sides are in a formal mediation process right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really measured response, and we didn't want to spend too long on this. We just wanted to obviously acknowledge it. There's plenty of conjecture in the media and on different forums, and we're just waiting for the official information from the airline, from Solidarity, which is the pilots union, etc. Yeah, we'll just watch and see on this one, but we did want to mention it because it obviously is having a big impact on connectivity, and as you say, it can't go on indefinitely. It's not good for anybody. Let's find a solution sooner rather than later. Okay, Behramjee, let me come to you now because we're going to go to Nigeria, and we've got a couple of really interesting things happening over in Nigeria. The first is Virgin have announced they're going to increase capacity on London to Lagos. So they are going to start to deploy the 397-seater A350-1000 from the end of October, from October the 26th. So is it a short-term attacking strategy here in the market just to throw in some extra capacity, or is this a long-term move with underlying sort of demand metrics that make this make sense? What's your take?
Thank you, John. Good morning to all. Firstly, regarding why Virgin is deploying the 350-1000 high-density aircraft, I think we have to look at the grassroots cause of this. Number one, it's actually a two-pronged approach. Number one is that both BA and Virgin have been affected somewhat by Airpeace's entry into the London-Lagos market, mainly due to Airpeace driving down yields. So in order to aggressively counterattack Airpeace with their low fares, Virgin is deploying the higher density 397-seater A350-1000, not on a permanent basis, just for about 4 or 5 months in this winter season from end October onwards. And then they'll switch to the more standard A350-1000 from the latter part of the winter season. Now, the other reason for this, I feel, is that usually these airplanes get deployed to South Florida and Caribbean destinations, as well as Las Vegas during the IATA winter season from the UK. But due to a drop in demand to the US in particular from the UK, due to politics and other reasons, Virgin has pivoted accordingly and done the smart move by redeploying it on a route where there is more demand than supply, where it can most likely guarantee to fill the seats across all cabins. So from a strategic point of view, though it is short term, it's a good aggressive move. The only drawback for Virgin by deploying this aircraft is that it has only 16 business class seats. And for the Lagos market, you need more premium seats, especially from London, in order to realize a decent amount of profitability. The reason why I'm saying this, the number of seats in business class, is because if you look at the last 12 months data on the London-Lagos route, Virgin has the highest market share of 30%, followed by British Airways 16% and Air Peace 15%, which means the non-stop carriers control 61% of the market share. However, BA's fare one way on average across all cabin classes on the Lagos route was $1,300 with YQ included. Virgin's was less than half, $585, whilst Air Peace was $309 one way. So that just goes to tell you how much higher yielding British Airways' packs are on this route, mainly because their first class and business class cabin sell out quite well. Virgin does not have a first class cabin, so its yield would be lower than BA's, but its BA's average fare is more than double of Virgin. So short term, it's a good counter-attack move, especially during the high season in December, January. But the smart thing which Virgin has done is that it's a short-term move and it will revert back to a standard A350-1000, which is still a capacity increase of over 30% versus the A330-900, which it uses currently, as their standard A350-1000 accommodates 44 business class passengers. So once they revert to that aircraft, I think the profits would be much higher.
Great. Yeah, I think those numbers are super interesting. Yeah, Sean, please go for it.
Now, I'm going to add one other point into the numbers over there, which is while Behramjee is absolutely right in terms that Virgin is still the O&D market leader in that market, London to Lagos, one thing to note is that Virgin's market share is the total number of passengers they transported has actually dropped year on year, but more critically for them, the yields have dropped year on year by about 15% between 2003 to 2023 and 2024. And this coincides with the timeline that Air Peace entered into the market in 2024. So I think what Virgin is actually doing over here is that they're pivoting away from being a higher yield focus on the Nigeria route to a volume-driven, lower yield, but obviously a similar cost basis on the A350-1000 with the higher density configuration over the VFR peak season over Christmas time. And as Behramjee says, it's also a case of they have these units and demand to the US is softer than it has been in past years over December and so forth. And the units are available. Nigeria is a market where they can be deployed. And Nigeria is a market where the dynamics over the last year or so, specifically for Virgin's own yields and traffic, have created a situation where deploying these over there makes a lot of sense for them. So I think I don't disagree with Behramjee that the small business class cabin is a bit of a handicap for them, but keeping in mind where the market they're going to have to compete in here, which is largely economy traffic and premium economy traffic, I think I would not be surprised to see this become a year-round thing, assuming that, of course, that the units were available throughout the year. But I think this might be the space where Virgin is able to compete best with Air Peace, especially with Air Peace's addition of Abuja as well, and which is going to draw some traffic from Lagos on that schedule with connections via Abuja, just simply given that Abuja is a daytime flight northbound as opposed to the Lagos, which is an overnight flight.
Yeah, Behramjee, you wanted to add something?
Yes, the more important part in this strategy of Virgin is that people should realize the economy size of the A350 cabin is 76% more than the A330-900 Neo. So virtually it's 3/4 more capacity of seats being flown into Lagos by Virgin, and that clearly shows where they are aiming to target and poach market share away from. They're not looking at the high-yielding
It's not the
passenger
poaching.
of
They are the
BAs
market share
OTAs.
leader. They are
Yeah,
the
but they
market
just want to
leader. So at the end of
consolidate
the
their
day, this
market
is
share.
them. Exactly. They're doubling down on what they think their
Yeah.
strength is, and their strength is in volume. So the reality is, and especially
Yeah.
given their schedule, they are an O&D market. They're not really selling onward connections from the UK into North America via London, unlike BA, which obviously is. So if you look in terms of that,
Yes.
Virgin is targeting the O&D, and the O&D is primarily VFR. So the more capacity they can put in, regardless
Correct.
of the yields, that's where their competitive space is. And I think that's what this aircraft is really signifying, that the change is signifying.
Yeah, and ultimately, like you say, it's a response to the geopolitics of what's happening in Virgin's market westbound to the US. It's a response to Air Peace adding capacity and starting the routes into London. And I suppose with looking at those yields and looking at those fare reductions, then in the short term at least, there is some benefit here for the travelling public that they will see some lower fares and some more competition on the route and all that extra capacity coming in over the winter season. So I think it is really interesting to watch that. And I think you've done a great job of exploring it. So while we're in Nigeria, let's stick with what's happening there. And let's talk about Qatar, because Qatar Airways are actually going to reduce flights for the winter season. So what's going to happen and why is it going to happen? Who wants to kick that one off for us? Go on, Sean.
I can kick this one off because I was actually just talking to Qatar about this earlier today. And so what Qatar is actually doing is that they're dropping their Lagos frequencies from what is currently double daily. That's going to go down to 10 weekly. They're reducing. So Abuja is currently at daily. That's going to go down to 5 weekly. Kano's at 3. It's going to go down to 2. And Port Harcourt's at 4. It's going to go down to 3. So these are just trimming of 1 or 2 frequencies here and there. My question to Qatar was basically, is this something that is indicative of market shift, or is it just basic routine capacity redeployment? And the answer from Qatar is that it's routine capacity redeployment. They're just moving aircraft away from the Nigeria market to other routes, which they think are benefits for them over winter. In fact, we've seen that they're increasing services to Cape Town and Johannesburg. I think Joe had pointed this out over the winter instead. But also something which I think we missed out when we just looked at the frequency reductions is that to Nigeria, they're going to be upgauging some flights from 787 to A350, which has a higher premium capacity in the Nigeria market. And so at the end of the day, their strategy is largely going to be a seasonal one over here, and they're stressing the point that this is not indicative of any issues with the Nigeria market in particular. It is just a routine capacity redeployment of 1 or 2 frequencies here and there. They continue to be 10 times a week into Lagos, which is a huge amount of capacity into there. And I think the structural deficiencies of the Nigerian market, which constrained a lot of the international carriers growing there, are, I wouldn't necessarily say resolved, but definitely mitigated somewhat. You can get Forex out of Nigeria. There is liquidity in that market. Demand is beginning to bounce back more and more. So I think, I believe that when they say that this is just a case of these planes can be better used elsewhere. And especially the point about bringing in the 350 in lieu of the 787, I think reiterates that a bit more. They're very committed to the Nigerian market, and this is just a seasonal tweak.
Yeah, so network optimization more so than any sort of underlying anything else. Is that your understanding, Behramjee? Anything else you wanted to add on this? Give us a bit of color to it.
Actually, what Sean said is correct. What I would just like to state is that in Lagos in particular, both Qatar Airways in particular, more so than Emirates, will start feeling the pinch this summer onwards because of Ethiopian Airlines increasing their own Lagos flights from daily to double daily. So that will affect Qatar Airways' market share into Asia in particular, especially Guangzhou and Dubai. Qatar Airways' biggest market out of Lagos in the last year as well as for the past few years has been Guangzhou. Last year in particular it was Guangzhou. The previous year it was London and Dubai. But last year in particular, Guangzhou was number one. Delhi, Doha was number two, which is point to point, which is understandable, followed by Delhi, Dubai, London, and Mumbai. So with Ethiopian increasing flights connecting to Guangzhou and Dubai in particular, with their second hubway bank, I expect to see Ethiopian poaching away some traffic from QR. And also, like Jon also mentioned, they're increasing capacity into Cape Town and Joburg from this winter onwards. Cape Town goes up from 10 to 12 times a week, Joburg from double daily to 18 weekly. So it's a more sensible redeployment of capacity because we all know South Africa demand in the winter season from both Asia and Europe is very high.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it all adds up. So you just talked about South Africa, so let's go down there again. We've been talked about SAFAir. We're now going to go and talk about SAS.
I'm sitting here right now. Hey, might as well.
Exactly, Sean. Sean's there. Yeah, so we're going to talk SAA. Now, they've been in the news a couple of times in July for two different things. So the first one we're going to talk about is actually the new route that was announced, which is a first direct service between Cape Town and Mauritius, which is going to launch Tuesday, the 9th of December, 2025, 3 times a week on a Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And pretty amazing because, of course, its origin is Cape Town. And this has always been a bone of contention about SAA really using Joburg as its hub for everything apart from flights to and from Cape Town. They've done this a little bit with what's happened with Sao Paulo and splitting the schedule there, but this is quite interesting as a regional route. So yeah, I'd love to get a bit of idea as to where this came from, whether we saw this coming and whether it's a good idea, really. So yeah, kick us off, Sean.
You said that two reasons South African Airways has been in the news, and the reality is they're both linked. And I'll mention the elephant. The other elephant in the room is that South African Airways has had to restate their financial results. So what they had stated recently and had claimed, and which I had consistently qualified that they claim this pending audited accounts. Unfortunately, the audited accounts have told a different story. So South African Airways' claims of having made an operational profit in the last financial year, they declared results, have now been reversed, and they have instead made a loss. Now, the numbers are not huge. We're not talking the billions and billions of rand and dollars that SAA version 1 used to annually declare on losses, but it does show the fact that SAA is not profitable as they earlier claimed. And consequently, that has had an impact in terms of SAA's ability to finance the A330s that we had discussed both at AviaDev in the panel discussion as well as subsequent panel discussions in which they had said was going to be part of their South long-haul connection strategy and so forth. As a result, SAA is going to now have to look at their expansion plans with their narrow-body fleet. Now, the narrow-body fleet this winter is actually going to be very interesting because they're going to have 14 A320s as well as 4 737-800s from Sun Express on wet lease, which they've confirmed is going to be coming again this year. So with 18 narrow bodies plus the 4 wide bodies they're currently operating, that does give them the ability to look at niche, and this is using their words, niche regional and domestic destinations from a secondary hub. And I think Cape Town to Mauritius is a perfect example of that, which there's strong winter season demand. SAA has the capacity now, especially on narrow-body regional aircraft, whether that's 737 or A320, effectively interchangeable. Maybe traffic rights-wise, you can't necessarily deploy the 737 everywhere, but it can backfill an A320 on a domestic route. And this is a route that Air Mauritius, I believe, did fly seasonally pre-COVID, but on wide bodies. And I think the A320, assuming that it can do it without any range issues, which it should be able to, I think it's right about on a payload level, about 5.5 to 6 hours. I think it's a low risk. Once again, for all the criticism I have of SAA, the way they have grown their network in the SAA version 2 era has been very sensible. They've opened the right routes, they've opened low-risk routes, they've opened marginal routes, they've not been afraid to step back from routes like Malawi, unfortunately, when economic conditions change. The only thing I've disagreed with them is the split on Cape Town and Johannesburg to Sao Paulo. I think if you're going to do it, you should have just stuck to Cape Town, where you had a unique market. But there are other market dynamics, they assure me, which make sense. I'm yet to see them, but 2 years on, they're still sticking to it, so something must be working. But I think Cape Town to Mauritius is going to be interesting, and I would not be surprised to see a few other domestic routes from Cape Town maybe over the winter season. Just judging by what they've said, I'd see maybe Cape Town Durban. We mentioned it earlier that that's something that they're currently flying on charter for FlySafair. I wouldn't be surprised to see that come in over there. I'd expect to see more services to George, all these winter destinations along the coast, which are very popular in South Africa. 18 narrow-body aircraft is a lot of capacity for them to use, and especially since so much of their regional growth recently has been utility flying on overnight banks, that gives them a full day to fly the 737s all day long, and with these additional A320s also having come online. 18 aircraft. So it's sensible, and that's something they're doing right. So kudos to the network team over there. I don't often say good things about SAA, but on this point I do.
No, thank you. Yeah, and it's very interesting because we talk about regional connectivity, and like you say, it's a 5.5 hour, 6 hour flight to Mauritius. It's a heck of a journey, but they've got the aircraft to do it. And I think you've also brought up the second element of my question, so thanks for bringing that in. There was a revenue increase of 23%, which is great, but that revenue is vanity, right? And profit is sanity, as they say. The underlying number is absolutely what's important, and the impact, as you've said, on their acquisitions and their growth plans. So continuing to reinvent themselves as this regional player, but with the narrow body aircraft, and saying, where should we fly this within the region? And we know there's loads of opportunity there. We've seen Safair do this and go into the region. We've seen Lifter talking about that as well with the same aircraft. We'll see what happens. Behramjee, what would you like to add on the SAA situation?
Firstly, flying Mauritius to Cape Town, there is definitely a big market in terms of African size potential. 63,000 passengers, to be precise, flew this route point to point over the last year, paying $325 one way. I believe Air Mauritius flies this route currently with the 319. Am I right, Sean?
Not currently, but it has been flown
Sean?
seasonally in the past, yes.
Okay. In comparison, though, Joburg to Mauritius is a much bigger market, 3 times bigger, 212,819 passengers, but a much lower yield, $238 one way. The reason also why Mauritius is popular with South Africans, especially those flying from Cape Town, is because the beaches in Mauritius have year-round warm water. Cape Town, though the weather is warm during the winter season, the water in the beaches of Cape Town are not, because it meets the Atlantic Ocean. So I've personally been to Cape Town in the winter season, so the water at the beaches is not warm. So for South Africans to enjoy
you've
a
told
proper
us
beach
you've
holiday.
told us this story before, Behramjee.
Yes.
Behramjee, I think this is the
Yes, I
fourth
know.
consecutive podcast where you've mentioned the warm waters of Mauritius. Are you part of Mauritius tourism by chance?
The guys from Cape Town tourism are ringing me up saying, Enver's ringing me saying, will you stop him telling us that the water's cold? The people will stop wanting to come.
To be fair, in December, Cape Town has more than enough demand that they can spill a bit of locals going to Mauritius. So I think Cape Town has a problem of plenty.
And what about the biggest strategy? He talked about the underlying numbers, Behramjee, but of course, when you put this route in, it's going to offer this kind of multi-destination opportunity for internationals that either they're going to be thinking, I'm coming to Cape Town, I want to get to Mauritius, and I want to go direct. So it's going to have a premium attraction because of that, but also through their partners as well, right? Like they will be able to get some connectivity based on some of their international partners. Very little.
Very little. Because Emirates is increasing Mauritius to triple daily this winter. You've got Turkish Airlines flying there. You've got Air France, British Airways, Virgin also flying there, as well as Discover Airlines and Condor from Germany. So the only interline that you might get is just when it's high season when flight seats are not available on the European carriers and UK, someone will have to fly via South Africa to get to Mauritius. And also, what will help is the
Now,
domestic
that's not going to
connection.
happen. Remember,
Yeah,
South
very little.
Africa is Mauritius's largest market. And in terms of the market, this is one
Oh,
of
yeah.
their prime source markets anyway. So I think it can more than support O&D growth itself. Plus, another increase to Mauritius, by the way, is Indigo is also increasing their Bangalore to Mauritius flights, which are now going up
Yes,
to daily this winter as well. Mauritius is
right.
seeing a huge increase. These SA flights, the Safair is flying this year, which they weren't flying as much last year. So EK, South African,
One second.
Turkish, Indigo. There's a whole range of stuff that is being added into the Mauritius market. And I think the SAA one of all of that is probably the least risk. And it's just an obvious one. It's a 60,000 market calling out for nonstop service in a peak season. You can't go really wrong with doing something like that.
Yeah, and I think it would be interesting to look at Mauritius as a market in one of our future. We talked about it a little bit here, and what it means for Air Mauritius, because it's stuck in this position of there's so much capacity coming in from other carriers, and these are established carriers putting in so much. But also, the thing I was just going to ask you, Sean, is what about the other way? What about Mauritius to Cape Town for passengers that they've been on the beach and they fancy going back to they go through Cape Town and go back that way? I don't know.
Possibly, but the beaches of Mauritius are warm while the beaches of Cape Town are cold. So I don't think the passenger going for a beach holiday is likely to want to mix warm and cold because you just then get just lukewarm kind of thing. So I think this one is, we're overthinking it if we say it's anything other than the O&D South Africa to Mauritius market, which is crying out for additional capacity, and they're providing it. And I think what they're just again, if we look in terms of their fleet dynamics, in the past, they've flown a wide body as well as a narrow body from Johannesburg. I think by moving this, the capacity that used to connect from Cape Town via Johannesburg to Mauritius is just simply going to go on the non-stop flights instead. So it's just a logical thing which you can do when you have 18 aircraft to play with over the winter season.
Yeah, and 3 times a week with a narrow body, it's not a huge amount of capacity.
It's in risk. It's low risk, high reward. And that's the sensible type of fleet and network decisions that SAV2 is making. Despite every other problem they've got, network planning is not one of them. And kudos to TT and Emmanuel and all the guys over there because they're doing a smart thing.
Nice one. Yeah, excellent. Okay, let's go and talk about FastJet, and let's talk of a couple of they've been in the news for a couple of things as well. We'll talk about the route in a second, but the first one, which was of course discussed in detail a couple of months ago, is FastJet Mozambique. So, what's the latest, Sean? What's going on there? Because it's been very quiet.
Yes. So I asked Julian about this, and I asked if I could even quote him, and he says, please go ahead and quote. He says, we are getting very frustrated. The government has gone quiet on us, and if we don't hear anything soon, we're close to redeploying the aircraft elsewhere. And I think that is something he wants to use our platform to make very clear out there. So if anyone from the government of Mozambique is listening, please use this. But yeah, FastJet had intention of opening up domestic routes again in Mozambique. They'd been there before. They've done this before. They got all the logistics and the market experience in place to do this. Something the Mozambique market could have benefited tremendously from, given LAM and MEX's current constraints with fleet and so forth. But various reasons, political, bureaucratic, speculatively, have prevented that from coming to fruition. And unfortunately, something which we see is that when private sector wants to come and do things and government stifles it, private sector often backs away. And I think it's a very clear message from FastJet to the Mozambican authorities that they intend to come in and provide a service in that market, but if they are not welcome in that market, they will deploy their capacity elsewhere. And I think one of their capacity deployed elsewhere is the second part of what we were going to discuss with FastJet, is that they've just announced a new route, which is about to start, and that is going to be a domestic route within Zimbabwe from Victoria Falls to Bulawayo. And this one's a very interesting one because it is a domestic route, and the reality is if you were driving it, it shouldn't take more than a few hours. But given the state of the roads there, and I was in Vic Falls last week, actually, myself, and the roads within Vic Falls are great. And the moment you literally pass the airport and go like a kilometer past the airport, these are now craters of the moon. And supposedly it takes as much as 10 to 12 hours to drive between Bulawayo and Vic Falls. And they believe strongly that there is a business case, and I tend to agree with it. I think that domestic routes within Africa not only they are your bread and butter. If you are a strong carrier in a home market, you have to dominate your domestic market to be successful. And I think FastJet, as part of the pivot which we discussed last year, is that what they had to do, they've had to refocus away from just flying Harare, Johannesburg for the most part, which has been, which used to be their bread and butter route, but now has become more competitive. And I think focusing on these niches where the Embraer 145 has tremendous amount of potential. And I flew on FastJet to Vic Falls a couple of weeks ago. I was very impressed by the project. It's the first time I've flown on them, despite many years of talking to the team over there about ways of deploying the 145. And I think they've got a very solid product. If I was living in Zimbabwe and needed to fly domestically, I would pick FastJet because they are reliable, they have a decent product, and they're usually fairly decently priced. Yeah, I think that route is going to be successful, and I would not be surprised to see Vic Falls, Bulawayo grow into more than daily service within the course of a few months. I think that demand will really pick up very quickly, both for tourists as well as business and VFR, students, the wide range of so many demographics that fly domestically in countries.
Yeah, I think the thing with FastJet, which we've talked about, is focusing on these niche routes. It's something that Jules is really good at with his previous experience. And when he saw what was happening with the liberalisation between Zimbabwe and SA, he's okay, we're going to have to rethink our strategy, get ahead of the game here, because there will be loads of capacity deployed, as we've seen. And I think that, the domestic route, the first thing to say on that is that the airline themselves as well also said that they sat down and negotiated this route and got it all agreed at AviaDev in Zanzibar. So that was a nice little bit of information for us, because we do want to hear that, of course, the event is having an impact. And then the second thing, just on the Mozambique side of things, I guess the message I'm getting is we're ready, but we're not going to wait forever. We're in control. It's our asset. If you don't want us to do this and you don't meet our deadlines, we will deploy this somewhere else. Obviously, with everything that's going on with the new management structure at LAM and all of those things, that's probably impacting this, but we just don't know enough about that to decide. So again, they're very good at, in the interim, this is what we're going to do. But this, of course, this Bulawayo is something that they're planning to do 4 times a week from the 8th of August. So they've only got a week or so before that launches. Let's do one of our special deep dive segments. And we're going to do a deep dive here into the Paris-Charles de Gaulle to sub-Saharan African market dynamics. Obviously, what we want to focus on is how Ethiopian and Kenya Airways are performing in that segment and where the sort of dynamics are going. So you can kick us off on this one, Behramjee.
Sure. As we all know, we do deep dives on certain interesting routes over the past year. We've done before Guangzhou and Dubai. This time we're going to do Paris, because both Kenya Airways and Ethiopian have a sizable market presence over there. The next 2 routes that we're going to do is JFK or New York City, and then Johannesburg. So to start off with, in Paris, Ethiopian flies a daily A350 on the route, whilst Kenya Airways flies a daily 787-8 on the route. Point-to-point demand on the Nairobi route to Paris is about 43,000 passengers, whilst Addis Ababa is much less, coming in at 20,000 passengers. Air France and Kenya Airways, they both fly on this route due to the SkyTeam partnership. For obvious reasons, Kenya Airways transports a lot of transatlantic and European passengers via Paris, though Amsterdam is their preferred gateway for doing that. But what I would like to stress is how much superior is Ethiopian's performance on this route versus Kenya Airways. Ethiopian, over the last year, carried 206,611 passengers on this route across the entire African network, out of which Addis Ababa was only 8% of their traffic point to point. So 92% of their Paris flights passengers are transit via Addis Ababa. The top market for Ethiopian Airlines out of Paris, I would like John to take a guess. He will never be able to guess this, because even I did not know it.
You want
I
me
actually
to
guessed
guess?
it. I actually guessed it, and it was confirmed when I looked at the numbers. But go on, John. I want to hear your guess.
I'm declining because I'm just going to look stupid again. It's a massive trick, isn't it? Go on,
Okay,
Bram.
okay. Let me give you a next clue. Until the civil war in Yemen, this market was
Oh, he's broken
dominated by
right at that
Yemenia.
moment. Come on.
Sean, repeat, until the Civil War.
Oh, yeah. Just let his
Until the
internet
civil
come
war
back.
in
1
Yemen.
second.
Hmm.
Just give it a sec.
Until the civil war in Yemen.
His
Sorry, it's just
Bidvest
requiring me to
internet's
log
let
back
him
in.
down.
Yeah. I have to just log into this again.
No. Come on. He's still there, so that's good. He's not dropped completely.
Okay, I should be back.
Okay, I'll give you the hint, John. It is a
Well, wait a
destination
second.
which
Oh,
Emirates.
he's gone.
Okay, I'm back.
Oh, he's back. Here we go.
Okay. Until the civil war in Yemen, it was the market that was dominated by Yemenia.
Oh, brilliant. That's not a niche. That's not a niche.
Okay, no. I'll give John a more easier hint. It was a destination which Emirates used to fly an A310 to, and it's suspended for about 2 decades now.
I've no idea. Somewhere in the Middle East, somewhere in Saudi.
No.
Comoros.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
French, right?
That's the top market. 33,000 passengers in the last year for Ethiopian. There are other top markets. Yeah, that's nearly about 100 passengers round trip each day. There are other top markets are on the Paris route. Number 2 is also a surprise for me, is Windhoek in Namibia, followed by Brazzaville, 14,000,
No.
Zanzibar, 13,000, Mount Kilimanjaro, 13,000, Point Noir, 10,000, Madagascar, 10,000, Kinshasa, 7,000, and Victoria Falls, each at 6,000. So the Brazzaville market share this year, I'm sure, has increased because of Rwanda Air suspending flights over there. So there's much less competition on the Brazzaville route out of Paris. Also, SM Brussels does not fly there, nor does Egypt Air. So I do expect this year the Brazzaville to Paris market share to have gone up quite a bit. The yields on that route are also very good. Kenya Airways, in comparison, has carried half the number of passengers that Ethiopian has carried. They carried last year 110,409 passengers on this route, and their top market. Now, this should be an easy guess for you, John. Why don't you guess this time?
So
You were there recently.
I was there recently. Well, Cape Town?
No, Zanzibar.
You were there more recently.
Oh, Zanzibar, the
actually,
other
you were
one.
there just before. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. 35,000 passengers Kenya Airways uplifted between Zanzibar and Paris over the last year. That's their top market, followed by Madagascar, 16,000, Mombasa, 9,000, Kilimanjaro, 8,000. Nairobi, surprisingly, only 10% of Kenya Airways' passengers on the Paris route are point to point. That's about 11,000 over there, and Comoros is 7,000. So on the Comoros route, Ethiopian dominates versus Kenya Airways, nearly 5 times higher passengers, and then Mauritius 6,000. But altogether, on the point-to-point Nairobi to Paris route, Air France and Kenya Airways, they share 73% market share, and the yield is quite decent, $730 one way. But Air France has a slightly higher point-to-point market share on that route. Now, one other aspect I want to mention about Ethiopian Airlines, the 206,000 passengers they carried on the Paris route equals 83% load factor if using a daily A350-900. I
They also
definitely
use the
feel
1,000. So it's...
but over the last year, the 900 has been used more often than not. Actually,
80 to 90% is the 900, but the 1,000 is used since December at least once weekly because Airbus does the warranty maintenance the day set in Paris.
Okay, that's good to know. But further on that note, I do feel that the Paris route, once more A350-1000s are delivered, or even in the future 777-9s, the Paris route can easily support higher capacity aircraft without any problems whatsoever. In addition, I also would not be surprised if in the future Ethiopian does increase Paris from 7 to 10 or 12 times a week to support their new hub wave banks at Addis Ababa, because the market demand is there, and they're a very trusted carrier across Francophone Africa and Southern Africa.
Okay. Now, let me chime in on that point, Behramjee. I think it's a point where I can step in here because I've been
Yes.
itching to come in on this. Ethiopia's France strategy is not a Paris strategy. And you've mentioned Paris for there, but you forget that Ethiopian also serves Marseille. And Marseille is increasingly growing with Ethiopian. It is consistently being upgraded. It is now on a 350 as well. It's tagged, in fact, from last week, I believe, or the last couple of weeks. Marseille is now tagged onto Manchester, as well as and additionally, it flies to Geneva, which is effectively a very large French catchment area as well. And interestingly, when I was looking through these numbers, the number one market for Ethiopian from Paris, as we know, is Moroni and the Comoros. The number one market for Ethiopian from Marseille is Moroni in the Comoros, and the number one market for Ethiopian from Geneva is Moroni in the Comoros. So Ethiopian from France to the Comoros is a humongous market. It's to the point where they're actually, the three connecting destinations just in France are enough to actually fill a 787 daily from Addis connecting into Moroni. And it's a remarkable example of a niche route that nobody pays attention to, but ET just picks it up. Their numbers on this are equivalent to their numbers on Johannesburg, Mumbai via Addis Ababa, and that is good. Multiple banks and everything. This is just one primary route. And this is why I don't think that, in fact, I'm pretty sure that Ethiopian is not going to be trying to add additional flights into Paris, because it's going to be very hard for scheduling perspective to make those hub banks work from Paris. I think you'll see additional capacity into Paris, and I would not be surprised. They've got a fourth A350-1000 that, in fact, should be ready for delivery in August right now. Bravo Alpha Zulu, it's in testing in Toulouse right now. We've seen lovely pictures of it and stuff. And I think that's going to be there. And by the way, I promised Airbus I'd mention this. Airbus has also just opened a new customer support center in Johannesburg. I ran into them last week in Johannesburg when I was flying out. And so I promised them I'd give them a shout out on the podcast. So there you go, Airbus, shout out for you guys. But yeah, I think the 350-1000, which Ethiopian is going to get in, is probably going to wind up being deployed more often in the Paris route rather than just the once or twice weekly that it currently is. Beyond that, I think the trend which we've seen, or which we've commented on extensively, is that there is a growth of Indian Ocean destinations. Now that Moroni is the Indian Ocean destination, we're seeing that KQ's got their Mombasas and Zanzibars, ET's got its Zanzibars. Also, I don't know, Nosy Bay, Madagascar, and so forth. These are all up in the top 10 destinations from the French market. And the reality is also a top 10 destination from the Italian market, is a top 10 destination for most of the markets in Europe. And especially that is a trend that we're likely going to see growing. They've taken a lot of network decisions. They've doubled down on their Tanzania flying this last year. And I think in general, ET and KQ are both going to see their European networks become feeders through their hubs to these Indian Ocean beach destination or tourist destination. I won't necessarily say beach, but beach, cultural, tourist, trekking, safari, and so forth. But that East African coast, including the islands in the ocean, I think that is the growth segment from Europe through those East African key hubs into the region. So yeah, that's my general view on that. But as I said, this Moroni numbers from all three of those French gateways just blew my mind. I knew it was strong. I didn't realize how strong it was. And as I mentioned, it was something that do you remember there was the Yemenia A310 crash like probably 10, 15 years ago, maybe even longer, maybe my age is showing. But what really shocked me on that flight was that on that A310, I think 80 or 90% of those passengers had originated in France. And it was pretty much entirely French national connecting through Sana'a, Yemen, and then into the Comoros. And that's immediately when it struck me. I was like, I would not be surprised if Comoros was the number one market from France. And when I looked at the numbers, sure enough, Comoros was ET and KQ's number one market from France. KQ's second largest market from France, but still up there. And ET's largest from all three French gateways.
Yeah, that's you learn something new for sure. And we were delighted. We had the MD of the Comoros airports with us at AviaDev as well in Zanzibar. Maybe we'll have to get him on the podcast too in time. But yeah, really interesting to hear that. Yes, Behramjee, before we leave this one.
Yes, I would like to validate Sean's point also regarding the east coast of Africa for Ethiopian. Not only is Comoros their top market from Geneva and Marseille and Paris, but Zanzibar, Kilimanjaro, and Windhoek, as well as Madagascar, they are consistently the top 4 destinations for Marseille and Geneva as well over the last 2 years. So that's one thing. Second thing, regarding Kenya Airways on their Paris route, from the capacity deployed and the passengers uplifted, it works out to be a 66% load factor for them, which is decent. But one other advantage that Ethiopian has on the Paris route with using A350, their cargo loads in the belly are also very high both ways. So that incremental cargo revenue as well helps them a lot on that Paris route.
Yeah, you'd think,
Africa.
I know you say the load factor's good, but I would assume the load factor on their London routes is higher with KQ. I'm sure, I don't know whether you've got the numbers, but
I do, but I'm not.
Yeah, with the 787, you'd think you could have a higher load factor than that. I would assume, having flown that, anecdotally, it always feels like it's doing pretty well. So yeah,
yes, definitely more than 66%.
Yeah, there's still room.
You would hope so.
You would hope so. All right, we've got 20 minutes before Sean has to go to his departure gate.
Exactly.
We're going to rattle through a few more. So let's go to talk about Angola, and let's talk about TAAG. So TAAG in July have announced they are going to start 3 flights a week to Nairobi using their A220-300, their new delivered. From September the 1st, the aircraft continue to be arrived. They continue to be deployed on the regional basis. I want to start with you on this one, Behramjee, because I don't think you're too excited about this one for different reasons. So just let us know. Talk us through it.
Sure. With regards to TAAG starting Nairobi, I really don't understand why they're doing it, because the commercial justification from the numbers that I see is not there. Over the last year, only 4,026 passengers flew between Luanda and Nairobi round trip, which means about 13-14 passengers a day. But the yield is high, $815 one way. Now, Nairobi, Kenya, and Angola, they've got a more liberal visa regime, but Angola is not going to be a tourist market for Kenyans to go to, whilst Angolans might go to Kenya for safari, but I'm sure they prefer going to South Africa, which is more well known to them. And it's not a short flight, it's basically crossing from West Africa coast to the East African coast. So the commercial logic of flying that route using A220 or even a Q400 for that matter does not make any sense to me, as the market demand is not there. Transit traffic they will not get, hardly anything. They might get a little bit from Lisbon, but they're definitely not going to get any transit traffic from Johannesburg going to Nairobi. I strongly disagree that this route will perform with even 30 or 35% load factor, and I just don't see how it will continue to survive. Even Kenya Airways, with their large network of East Africa, Middle East, and Asia, could not make Luanda work, as well as connections to Europe. And TAAG has a much smaller network to make it work. So I really don't see any potential for TAAG on this route.
Okay, cool. And anything from Nairobi to South America, Sean, or are you on the same page, Behramjee?
Non-existent.
I'm not even going to say non-existent. I think, look, I know where TAAG is coming from. They have stated an intention of creating a hub at their new international airport, and obviously developing that into a hub. And the hub has to start by having the first few spokes. The first few spokes are not going to be huge feeders. They've just got to be there for the rest of the network to build. The problem I've got is that TAAG's track record in doing things like this has been woefully poor. They announce destinations, they don't launch them, they launch them and pull back out of them in 6 weeks. They've got a lot of credibility to earn for the first time from the market, because historically they've not really been a particularly credible, reliable, or decent airline to fly with. And let's see. I hope it works out for them, because I think there is tremendous potential for a hub in that region. And Luanda, all the options, Luanda, Kinshasa, Douala, Libreville, and all of those, Luanda is realistically the most logical one given the new infrastructure being put in there. So yes, I do wish them success, and I do hope it works. I have my doubts in the ability of TAAG in general and the current TAAG management in particular to be able to deliver a success story in that respect. And let's see what happens.
Yeah, let's see. Let's stay in East Africa. I've got a couple more things that happened in July, and then we'll head over to the West. So the first one would just be your reflections. I had the real privilege and pleasure of interviewing Nawar Durrani, who's the CEO of FlightLink. They've just launched daily flights to Jomo Kenyatta. So not just Nairobi, not just to Wilson, but obviously to the main international gateway. And he explained exactly why and why now and all that sort of stuff. But also a really inspirational story of how you can create. Yeah. My big point here is some people just say there are too many airlines. And I'm like, well, that's too simplistic. You need to think, where are the opportunities? He's somebody who's carved out a niche. And I think I see you smiling with a knowing smile there, Sean. So just your sort of reflections on that and your thoughts about his expansion in the region. You've got Jomo Kenyatta, but he's also doing a lot of extra flights to and from Zanzibar from different points in Tanzania and connecting Tanzania with Kenya. It's really in a growth section at the moment.
And I think that is exactly what we were discussing a little while ago, is that the inbound market to the East African coastal destinations, Zanzibar, Mombasa, stuff like that, is just booming. And that's booming not just in terms of traffic from Europe, but from within the region as well. You just look at it. Jumbo Jet's doing well. They're adding more frequencies. KQ's adding more frequencies over there. The Middle East is adding flights into these destinations. It's where you want to be. And I think he's established himself as maybe not a national airline, but at least a hometown airline in that respect. And it makes sense. And he's already been operating safari flights, so to speak, out of Wilson. And I think the beach flights out of JKIA to complement the safari flights out of Wilson just establishes what he has, which is bringing people into the tourism destinations in the home market of Tanzania. And I think you've got that niche, double down on it. And I would not be surprised to see a similar kind of pivot from Kenyan operators, especially as a lot of the US-funded governmental traffic, which airlines like ALS and the like have been reliant on. I think these guys are going to have to try and pivot to find similar models like that over the next year or so. It's an existential threat to them, because the Somalia governmental and stuff like that traffic is, if not disappearing, but definitely cutting back significantly. And they've got assets and aircraft which they've got to redeploy somewhere. And I think coastal tourism markets, both for domestic, and I'd say domestic, but basically regional demand within the East African community, as well as feeders for wider tourism inbounds. It's a niche that the Munawar has shown can be successful, and I think others will copy it.
Yeah, really interesting. And I think each airline has to identify where the opportunity is. So with ALS,
so look at what your fleet is. You've got to look at where your skill set is and everything else. There is no one size fits all. And I will never say that there are too many airlines. My bread and butter is helping more airlines start up. I will never say that. But I also say that trying to copy other airlines without understanding what your own strengths are and what your own market is lacking is where most of these startups go wrong. So he's got it right, and I hope that people who want to emulate him use the principles he's applied, but don't necessarily copy and paste, but copy and paste without formatting.
Yeah, and I just really hope. It's very hard to make a private airline work in an environment that is dominated, and there is so much state-owned airline activity in that particular region. I just hope, that they're able to carve that niche, be left to run a decent business and not impacted by that when other airlines look at it and think, oh, yeah, we want to do this. We're jealous of it. It's a different type of operation with a different aircraft and different market dynamics. And these routes, if they don't work, he wouldn't fly them because he's a private operator and it's all about cash flow and balance sheets, and what comes in can go out.
And he's lucky that he's in Tanzania, where I will, again, refrain from using my favorite description of the national airline there, but effectively they are weak competitors. They have very poor reputation, they have very poor reliability, and consequently, he's in a position where if you get the basics right, you will be able to have a better brand position than the national airline has. And I think him, Precision, and others are proof of that. Air Tanzania is an afterthought rather than the first thought, despite the fact that they lose more money than everyone else put together.
Yeah, and then the next stage, as he explained on the podcast, there'll be a link in there so you can all have a listen if you haven't already, is look at partnerships and say, how can we connect? He's already aligning his schedules to fit with the international guys. Now it's a case of get on the IOSA certification and start getting those partnerships and getting that feed if you can.
He's going to be handicapped by Tanzania's EU blacklist position right now, and unfortunately, that is something that all Tanzanian carriers are going to be held liable for the sins of the parent.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll watch this space. So Behramjee, before we leave East Africa, Air India have suspended Nairobi, but will it come back? It's been off on, and they've said it's operational challenges. Like, how do you see this?
To be honest with you, Jon will be in a better position to answer this than me, as he has better insight into
I don't think anyone's in a position.
Problem at Air India.
I don't think anyone's in a position to answer this. Air India themselves really don't quite know what their priorities are with regards to Nairobi route. This is a route that anytime they seem to need an extra 787 freed up somewhere, Nairobi is the route that's suspended for 3 weeks and then comes back for 3 weeks and then goes away for 3 weeks. They've got a luxury of doing this because earlier this year or late last year, Air India and Kenya Airways signed a code share. So now Air India code shares and Kenya Airways' flights between Nairobi and Mumbai. So they can just basically cancel a flight and rebook everybody without blinking an eyelid. And I think that's largely what is happening. Both Air India and KQ have seen their market share between India and Kenya drop from obviously being the big players in the market to virtually big players with Indigo coming into it. And they simply cannot compete. This is just a hole in a network where they're trying to keep it plugged, but I would not be surprised to see Air India pulling out of Nairobi or redeploying Nairobi from Mumbai with a narrow body. They do not have wide bodies, especially with the current 787 challenges and 787s going in for refurbishment and so forth, to be wasting, and I'm using the term wasting very intentionally, but they're wasting a 787 flying in from Delhi to Nairobi, a route which has underperformed significantly for them since Indigo has come into this market. So they need to get out of Delhi to Nairobi. If they want to play Nairobi, they need to play Nairobi from Mumbai or Ahmedabad with a narrow body, and probably Mumbai just because of better connectivity and everything, and put in a 321 into that market, fly 3 times a week with a business class cabin, and you'll get some high yield traffic. But then do they need to do that if they're code sharing with KQ? Gut feeling says no. But they've never been the most logical decision makers.
Yeah, let's again wait and see. I think you're giving us some good info on that. A couple of things left. So we're going to go to West Africa and we're going to talk about ASKY very quickly. A hub carrier based in Togo, 14 aircraft, 737s, Maxes and 800s. Yesterday I spoke to Date, our good friend, the head of commercial. And they have said that on Saturday this week, they are actually August 2nd, they're going to start serving Nouakchott in Mauritania 3 times a week on the 737-800. There's a couple of really interesting things in this, and I sent you guys the messaging about... I listened
to the podcast on the flight down from Addis to Joburg last night, so I am fully up to date on it.
Excellent. We'd like to hear that. So it is live now. The links again will be there in the podcast. It only came out yesterday. But the big question, I suppose, is as the fleet grows, is where can they go to next?
I think Nouakchott is interesting, and I think while the Nouakchott market itself isn't very large, I think Nouakchott is relevant because it has now completed their collection of West African capital cities. This was the last country which ASKY did not fly to in West Central Africa, and now they've completed the full set. So if you need to go to any country in West or Central Africa, all the way down from Nouakchott to Luanda, effectively, there is a continuous chain of countries which ASKY serves. I think from what he said, there's nothing news to me because I do chat with him very regularly. I chatted with his predecessor regularly. I chatted with his predecessors regularly. There is a long chain of close relations with ASKY, and I think they've had a very consistent strategy for the last 15 years that they've been in operation. They've wanted to connect all African, West and Central African countries. They've got a very good hub in Lomé. In fact, it's a textbook hub. They only run hub flights. They've expanded that to Nairobi, Johannesburg as the non-West African routes, so East Africa, which again they mentioned as feeders. And I think, as he alluded to, but didn't quite say outright, I think the next phase in their growth is going to be delinking routes. He mentioned an example like Conakry is now going nonstop as the Conakry extends to Nouakchott, even though they don't have the fifth freedoms. That helps in elapsed times. And we've seen that in more and more destinations where they're able to go into non-stops rather than one-stop, two-stop. I remember flying ASKY from Accra to Johannesburg in 2019, and it was Accra, Lomé, Lagos, Libreville, Johannesburg. And it was so nasty that I threw away my return ticket and asked SAA to at least give me a staff ticket and fly me home. It was that bad. I think I still have that ticket pending somewhere. I should try and see if I can get a refund on it. But that's basically how nasty some of those routes were. But they were essential because while from Accra I had the option of a non-stop flight, if you were in N'Djamena or Bissau or somewhere like that, this actually was a lifeline for you. And I think, I've got nothing but respect for ASKY. I've competed against them. I've partnered with them. I've competed against them. I've done everything, but they've just been good guys and they've done a very good job. And I'm very glad to see that their view of completing the set of West African countries is finally coming to fruition. And I want to give a shout out to someone who is probably not listening to this podcast, but Ato Girma knows who he is, and I know he listens to it, and that's Kinfe Kasaye, because Kinfe he wanted to do this in Ghana, and he worked with us in Ghana on this from the Ethiopian side back in the early 2000s on this Pan-African carrier, and that was the same model that they then transplanted and put into Togo. And I think if Kinfe is listening, this is really the model that you also had envisioned, and I'm just very glad to see it come to fruition now, 15 years down the line.
Who knows? That could be the second hub for ASKY, right? In Accra. Who knows? We'll I maybe ask that question on the podcast.
Happen.
No,
not going to happen. Not going to happen. Don't hold your breath.
No, absolutely. Anything to add on ASKY, Behramjee? I know you heard most of them.
As Sean said, a very respectable carrier now. It has come post-COVID. It has really transformed itself for the better. The yields are much, much higher post-COVID, as well as their reputation in the West African and Central African market. They make my life very hard on the Douala, N'Djamena and Douala Bangui route.
But you flew them last week, didn't you?
Yes, I flew them from Lomé to Douala. That flight goes on to N'Djamena, and that flight was 100% sold out on the 737-8, 800, not the MAX. They had another flight 20 minutes later, also Lomé to Douala, going onwards to Bangui. That wasn't full, but the N'Djamena flight on Sunday was full. What I heard in your podcast yesterday with Date was, unfortunately, Conakry to Nouakchott, they don't have the fifth freedom traffic rights as yet. And I found that to be very silly on the part of both Mauritania and Guinea's authorities, because
more Mauritania than Guinea, I think.
Yeah, Air Mauritania is basically a basket case, and ASKY is basically promoting connectivity, reliable connectivity between the two cities. So it's just hampering progress for very childish and immature reasons. On another note, ASKY, the only route where I have successfully managed to have higher market share than them is on the Cotonou to Brazzaville and Cotonou to Point Noir route. Camair's market share on those two routes to and from the Congo into Cotonou is higher than ASKY, but obviously ASKY yields will be much higher than ours. But overall, they've also streamlined their fleet post-COVID. They've gotten rid of the Q400s and now standardized on the 737s, which brings a lot of efficiency across the whole airline. No, they had Q400s in 2020 and 2021. They had one or two units.
Maybe one. Sure? They had the one, you're right. It used to fly that Abidjan, because I used to see it parked at Abidjan. It used to overnight in Abidjan. Yeah. But it was just the one. It was just the one.
All right, let's leave it there. I'm sure we've got to run to the gate. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you to Jon, Behramjee, as always, for so much preparation and bringing the numbers and the insight and the opinions. We are going to be back in early September. So we won't be on in August, but we'll be back in early September to look back on August. So if you did enjoy the podcast, as always, subscribe. Please share it with somebody in the network you think would benefit. And yeah, we'll see you for the next episode.
Like
very
and subscribe.
Soon. Like and subscribe. Okay, see you soon. Bye-bye.